The next speaker we have is Nobel Peace Prize nominee Kathryn Bolkovac. We're going to start with a trailer from the movie that was made about her life. So let's roll.
You've been hired to represent the U.S. as a beacon of hope, as representatives of our highest aspirations. You will protect the rule of law where lawlessness is run rampant.
What brought you here? I heard the food was really great.
You want to take them home? 3,000 each.
Hi there.
What's going on here?
I don't know.
I know what's been happening to you.
You promise you can stop these men?
I promise. This involves all kinds of internationals, from military officers to diplomats.
All international personnel have immunity. They can't be prosecuted.
We have no police reports. You need to investigate this.
You talk to whoever you want. They're not listening. You're on your own.
What happened?
The god must have been following us.
Did you tell anybody?
We're watching you. You do better to shut your mouth.
This is an old friend, Peter Ward, Internal Affairs.
Trust me, you're not safe. Accidents do happen.
We need an armored security vehicle. What the hell they do?
None of your business.
Why do you want to get rid of her?
I have to protect this organization.
You've been ordered out of this mission.
Doesn't matter who I work for, I wouldn't let anybody get away with this.
Top-level military commanders are pulling your files.
We have a system that works here.
Oh, really? For who?
Are you sure you want to go ahead with this? You know there'll be no going back.
I don't want a scandal. I'm just doing my job.
I'm Kathryn Bolkovac. I am the woman behind the Whistleblower, played by Rachel Weisz in the film you just saw the clip of. I was an international police monitor in Bosnia between 1999 and 2001. And I was terminated for being a whistleblower, for turning the United Nations in, for turning international police officers in, and other internationals for being involved in organized crime, bringing human trafficking victims into Bosnia, across borders from East Europe to serve as sex slaves. So if you think that Jean's story is anything unique, certainly it was not. And certainly I never deemed myself a hero, and I really don't like being deemed a hero for simply doing my job. Today, what I do want to talk to you about is what I think my heroes have meant to me, and some of those things that make a hero. And I'm glad a few of you hung around for the last few speakers, because I kind of think it's the best part when you get to hear all these speakers throughout the day. And I realized as I had made my presentation today, how much everything the speakers talked about today were kind of wrapped up in mine. So maybe we can go ahead and go on to the slides now and what heroism means to me. And then I will take you through a very brief journey about my life, as some of the other speakers did, and how I have come to where I am today. Do I have a clicker, or are you guys just going to click them for me? You can click them for me. Okay. Acts of heroism can begin and end with simple acts or complicated decisions. Acts of initial and momentary bravery can develop into lifelong commitment toward making change and challenging international norms. You just heard 12 key words that I believe describe heroism. Were you able to pick up on them? Heroes don't consider themselves heroes, and I think as you heard from many of them today, you realize that as well. My heroes tend to live in a certain way. As you think about your heroes, think about these words that may come to mind, those same words that I opened with. First, simple. Heroes are really simple. They're innocent. They have no guile. They live a simple life. And that's really how they consider themselves to be. Heroes live in the moment. They live in the present. They're vigilant. They look around. They live in the here and now. They don't have expectations, and this is who they are, these people that you saw throughout the day. Decision makers. How many times did you guys hear that today? Decision makers make choices. They also make mistakes. I can't tell you how many mistakes I made in my life, and we'll go through some of those, at least what people thought were mistakes that I made. Heroes act. They act voluntarily, consciously, and many times unconsciously. The sum of their actions serve to create an impression or set an example. This is sometimes an act that is hard to follow. They have superhuman strength, as you saw. Heroes are brave. Bravery is really a spirit. It's the way one conducts oneself while committing an act. It's courage, valor, and composure under fire in any walk of life. Heroes are said to show splendor and magnificence in a time when everything is going to pieces around them. Commitment. Heroes have commitments to make and promises to keep. This commitment is seemingly embedded in their DNA. It can be the simple act of survival, as you heard about with the 3 Americans on the train in France, or it can be the act of love, generosity toward others, a commitment to your children, to your family. It's following a dream. It's following your own dream. Challenge. Challenge to a hero is an event that challenges and has no explanation. They challenge the status quo, the bully, the false prophets, or unjust and invalid acts and beliefs. They challenge a single restricted path. How many people did you hear today walked their own path, walked their own way? They seek to enlighten those who have succumbed to fear, greed, ignorance, or corruption. Heroes invite competition to arouse and stimulate others. Change. Heroes create change, but also are able to change. They can be radically different while maintaining their own value systems, traditional value systems, or new value systems. They are transformers of human thought and nature. They present a different position, idea, direction, at the same time exchanging ideas and new ways of growth and tolerance. Complicated. Heroes are simple, but they can become extremely complicated individuals, especially after they've been deemed a hero. How many of you have heard of those heroes out there who do a simple act or an act of great bravery, and then suddenly the spotlight is on them? It's no longer a simple life. Some could even have psychological, emotional problems, and maybe do things that are not very heroic at that point in time. Norms. In a global society, heroes embrace changing norms. This requires setting standards of behavior and new norms to be achieved. It does not mean settling for less with regard to societal development or personal achievement. The usual way does not challenge or seek a higher purpose. It's a lifelong journey, a journey you're all going to make, whether you realize it or not, a journey you're going to make perhaps every decade. A different change is going to be made. But it's going to be a journey. It's going to be a long road, a dark road, a lonely road. But you're all going to have one, and you're all going to have the opportunity to be a hero. I'm going to talk to you a bit about my journey. You can go on to the next slide. My road started not really in 1989, but for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to say it started in 1989 and is still running through today. Next slide. The 80s, time of big hair and big glasses, and my kids were not happy with me putting this in the photo. So that's me in about 1988, 89, my 3 kids. I had just been through a divorce. I'd been married 10 years, and I was in the police academy in Lincoln, Nebraska, getting ready to graduate. 1989, I graduated from the Lincoln Police Department. I'm the second row on the right. See the big guy, the white guy with the afro there on the side? Like I said, we had big hair. I'm the one with the big glasses and the big hair next to him. During that 10 years on the Lincoln Police Department, I was going through a divorce. I spent $10,000 in a custody battle. This was a situation where I was under so much stress. But I graduated my class with honors. I went on to become the first woman to get a forensic science degree on the department. I was involved in shootings, stabbings. And in 1999, I decided it was time to go to Bosnia. How many of you know where Bosnia even is? Great. In June 1999, I was recruited by a government contractor called DynCorp. I went to Bosnia as an International Police Task Force monitor. My job was to train and recruit local police officers in Bosnia on how to be responsible, basically. A war had just ended. They had no democratic principles in place. They had no systems in place. During the first year there, the first 6 months, I was in Sarajevo. I was stationed at a small station as a human rights investigator, investigating corruption, all kinds of crime within that country. And I was hearing rumors about human trafficking. All around the hills, this is what it looked like. This is what it looked like all across Bosnia at the time, much worse than this. I was interacting with internationals from all over the world. This is the German on top of the tank that was still in place, pointing down on the city of Sarajevo. And of course, we were having some fun, going up and taking pictures to send back home. I'm still early on in my mission here, 3 or 4 months, and thinking this is going to be an adventure. After 6 months, I was transferred north of Sarajevo, about 70 kilometers, to work on a special project called Effectively Addressing Violence Against Women. The main crux of this was a UN push to work on domestic violence in the country. As you all know, violence against women is horrible in many Eastern European countries, as well as African and Asian countries. So it was my job to train police officers on how to work these cases they had never worked before. This is a group of about 15, 20 officers who I was working with, and this group of officers were able to get the first conviction ever in Bosnia for domestic violence. These are some of my heroes. This is a Turkish stabilization force base. As you can see, more interaction, more fun. But during this time period, while I was working in Zenica, the first trafficking victim came through my office. She wandered away from the brothel around the hills of Zenica, was picked up by the local police and brought to my office. She'd been beaten, raped, thrown in the ditch, and didn't speak Bosnian. When the local translator tried to help me, the dialect was unknown. It turned out she was from Ukraine. And the only words she could really say that any of us understood were Florida, Florida, Florida. And the Florida bar happened to be a brothel outside of the city limits. So we went to the Florida bar and wound up kicking a story door in on the second floor and taking out 7 young women who were chained to a mattress on the floor, locked in this room, had been starved, were urinating in bedpans, and had condoms strewn throughout the bed, the mattresses on the floor. So this was the first real incident that I had in Bosnia with human trafficking, and I still didn't really know what it was, because in 1999, people weren't talking about human trafficking. That's a term that came along about mid-2000. So I helped these girls. After this mission was over in Zenica, I was promoted. I was only supposed to be in Bosnia for 1 year, then I was supposed to return home to my kids, who actually by this time were all heading off to college. My youngest was 15 when I went into the mission, but I was asked to stay an extra year and head up another project, this time at main headquarters in Sarajevo, and this was to actually be the head gender officer addressing human trafficking now and violence against women. I thought about it, I called the kids, and I decided to go ahead and take that position. A few tears were shed because of course I was going to be missing my 15-year-old's last 2 years of high school. So I didn't go to any proms. I wasn't there for many Christmases, Thanksgivings, but I did see over 100 trafficking victims come through my office in a 6-month period of time, just like the ones I described to you earlier. As I interviewed these girls, along with many other human rights investigators at that time, it was becoming quite clear that these girls weren't just victims of organized criminals in Bosnia. They were being brought to the country to service who? The internationals, the people with money. People just like me, just like you, just like Dad, just like Uncle Joe, the heads of the mission, the military, because the local men didn't have money to pay for these women. This isn't who the girls were being brought into the country for. So I started making reports. This picture is a picture of my boss, who was the head of the gender office at that time, and a colleague who we were actually saying goodbye to that day. He was from Greece. But I put this picture up there because this is one of the first reports that I was handing off to my boss that's in my hand. Of course, we're still having a good time trying to say goodbye to this guy and make light of things. But I'm handing in reports to my boss, internal documents to go to the Internal Affairs Office that include names, identifications, tattoos, jewelry, sometimes military numbers, and very good descriptions of individuals who could have been easily identified, who were facilitating human trafficking by not only visiting the brothels, but buying women outright for thousands of dollars and taking them home with them to be their mission wives. Next slide. This is Jacques-Paul Klein. This is at a medal parade where I was receiving a medal for my service in the mission. And this is the man who, less than a year later, would be booting me out of the mission, telling the world in international press releases that there was no human trafficking problem in Bosnia, and that I was fired for conduct on becoming an officer and virtually just being a woman and overreacting. Next slide. So now we're up to 2001, April, and I was fired by the government contractor who hired me, DynCorp. The United Nations did not back me up. All of the reports and all of the reporting that was not only done by me but other officers was trashed. And I was booted out of Bosnia and told to find my way out. They weren't even going to buy me a plane ticket home. Little did they know that I really didn't leave Bosnia that easily. If I was no longer an employee, I had my own passport, and I certainly was free to stay if I wished. So I stayed, I collected further evidence, and wound up filing a lawsuit in the United Kingdom against my employer, DynCorp, who was an American government contractor, yet they underwrote their contract in the country of the United Kingdom. So I wound up taken to an employment tribunal. I won my case in England. It was a 2-year process. This made international news headlines. It did make news here in the United States as well. But unfortunately, it was quite overshadowed during those years because between 2001 and 2003, there was a lot more going on in the United States than any of us wanted to deal with, called 9/11. So partly for that reason, a lot of the information that came out about my case, I believe, was not put to the forefront. So we're up to about 2004. I've won my case, and suddenly I get a call from I was getting a lot of calls and emails from many film producers wanting to make a film about my story. I didn't really want to do that at all. So at one point, though, I did give in to a young girl and her partner. She was Canadian-born and an Irish writer. They wanted to come talk to me. I was living in the Netherlands at the time with my boyfriend, who had supported me throughout this process and who I'd met in Bosnia. Came and spent the weekend. They were just out of Columbia Film School. They interviewed me. I agreed that yes, they could go ahead and make a film. Certainly never thought this film would ever actually happen because, right, here you are, 2 kids, nothing going on. In fact, as they were leaving the door to walk out the front door, they said, "Kathy, we really don't have any money we can offer you to secure your life rights, but we're still securing funding, and would you take $100? Sure. Like I said, I didn't think this was going to happen. And then they said, "By the way, why haven't you written a book?" And I said, "Well, I'm not a writer. I'm a cop. I'm used to writing cops reports. I was a reporter for the court. But as I turned around and saw the flyers and the documents and the binders on my table, which I had just been through a 2-year court process with, I thought, what better way to document further than to go ahead and write a book? So I sat down for 6 months for 12 hours a day and wrote a 650-page manuscript. I closed it, put it on the shelf, and gave a copy to the film director and writer and said, here you go, here's your resource. This way you don't have to call me every day. For $100, I really didn't feel like talking every day on the phone with these people. So over the next 6 years then, between 2004 and 2010, that was a process. I worked full-time at managerial jobs. I began speaking at defense departments, at universities, community organizations, and then in 2009, the film was being produced. Rachel Weisz and some of the most wonderful actors and actresses, I think, in the world, volunteered a lot of their time to make this film. It was a very low-budget film. It cost, I think, $8 million to make. And in 2010, it went to the Toronto Film Festival and was in theaters all over the world, including the United States, in 2011. My book also came out at the same time, and I decided it was time to start remaking myself again as well. In 2013, after, again, traveling the world, doing a lot of publicity on the film and book, getting very tired, a relationship ending again, I decided it was time to move home. I came back to the United States. You can go ahead and switch the slides. And I became a grandmother of 5, starting in 2006. So during all that time, again, I was missing time out with my granddaughter, the oldest. 2 more twins came along, and now I have 2 more boys. So those 3 babies in the beginning are now pretty good parents. The film and the book are 2 separate projects. The film, of course, is slightly fictionalized. It follows the brief story. The beginnings of the film are not my factual account story. There's a lot of things that are different about my real life story. The film sends a very powerful message about human trafficking and the corruption within the United Nations, our own government, the State Department, international organizations. And yet the book is the factual account. And it names names of people involved, State Department employees, contractor employees. However, I did change the names of the victims. There are some limited copies of the book I brought, and I do think if you don't read the book and see the film, that perhaps you should see both. Maybe you can get a copy for your school or get it cheaply online. But it's important that you read the book, I think. So I got back to the simple life of baking cookies and homemade donuts with my granddaughter in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I decided to go back to school once again. Oh, I forgot to mention I went to nursing school for 2.5 years, too, in between there somewhere. But I didn't really like that. These hands weren't meant to be a nurse. So I went back to UNL and got my degree in political science. Now I'm back in Nebraska working for the state. And in January, I was contacted by a professor at Oslo University telling me, surprise, we'd like to nominate you for the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, as you can imagine, I really didn't have time for that. I thought it was a hoax. I was really busy studying for finals, trying to pass Professor Ari Cohen's class, as well as statistics, which I hated. So to be contacted and told, what do you think? Are you up for it? Did I have a choice? Not really. But they did ask me to write a few words, what I thought about that. And so I sat down for an hour and whipped out some paper and sent a copy off to them. And when they emailed me back, I didn't expect to be nominated because actually the Nobel Peace Prize, according to them, is all about disarmament, worldwide disarmament. And I'm not so sure I'm in total agreement with that. And I had to write my true feelings. I had to talk about, of course, I'm in favor of disarmament, but total disarmament, it's going to take a while. I was a police officer. I carried a weapon. Carrying a weapon saved my life more than once. I had to use my weapon while on duty. So this is something that I really had to think a lot about. But they really wanted to focus more not on my human trafficking work that I had done, but on the corruption and the fact that government contractors were being used so much across the United States, or across the world in these mission areas. And that was really the crux of my nomination, trying to decrease the use of military contractors. So that's where I am today, and I know we don't have time for much more, but I'll be happy to talk to any of you outside when we're done. Thank you.